And here we are on the last topic that we'll be covering in this Introduction to Philosophy course. And we're going to be covering the topic that quite a few classes would make the first of all the topics. What is the meaning of life? I like to save it towards the end because I think that it's a little bit easier to look into after we've looked at many of the other issues. Now, officially, this class was supposed to cover the life and thoughts and works of Soren Kierkegaard, a Danish thinker, writer, and philosopher. We're not really going to look at his works too much, although I will somewhat walk through some of the major stages of his life, as I think that it kind of shows a search for meaning and for purpose. Here's a quote by him. I find it kind of interesting. He says, "Life is not a problem to be solved." Now, pause. That's very different from almost every single thinker we've looked at so far. Almost every thinker we've seen so far, whether it be Aristotle, who says we need to solve the mystery of where everything, including the universe, comes from, whether it be Plato saying we need to solve the mystery of what the forms are, or anyone else we've looked at, they all say that that life is about solving puzzles and problems with our rational abilities. But Kierkegaard is going to take an exception to all that. He's going to say, yes, there are puzzles. Sure, there are problems, and it's good to try to solve them. But that's not the whole feature of life. There's more to it. Life is a reality to be experienced. What about the living part of life? If you spend all your time obsessing about problems and puzzles and writing papers about life, you'll miss it. You'll miss the purpose. So Kierkegaard is going to be different from most of the intellectuals we looked at so far. If you found the previous ones a little dry, mechanical, you might like Kierkegaard a bit more. So what do we mean when we talk about, quote, the meaning of life? Well, here's a few questions that people might ask, and I'm going to kind of take them all as emblematic. I'm going to take them as asking the same question. Sometimes people will say, why am I here? And we're not asking for, I'm lost. How did I end up in this location? No, we're saying, why? What is the purpose of my being here? Speaking of purpose, that's another way to put it. What is the purpose of life? Some people put it even more bluntly. Is there really any point to existing? Is there a goal? Is there something we should try to accomplish? Is there anything that we're supposed to do while we're here? All of these are different ways of asking about what is the meaning of life. It is fundamentally a question of purpose. Now, there are quite a few different perspectives on what the meaning of life is. What I will not do in this last lesson is say, there are some of the different perspectives and this one's right. In fact, I'm not even going to look at all the different perspectives. I'm going to survey just a very few of them and hopefully be done with that in about 5 minutes. And then I want to spend the rest of the topic, which is going to take several videos, probably 3, to look at the perspective of what the meaning of life is from one specific point of view. Now, you can often tell what someone's point of view on the meaning of life is by asking them the question, what is the biggest problem in life and what is the solution to that problem? So let me give you an idea how that works. For example, we've actually already seen this. Hinduism has a take on what the meaning of life is. How would you find that out? Well, start off by asking them, according to Hinduism, what is the greatest problem? What is the greatest obstacle to life? And they would probably say something to the effect of, there is this ultimate reality. We call it Brahman. We are meant to be united and one with it, but we are not. We have been separated from Brahman. That's the problem. Is there any sort of solution? Is there any sort of resolution to this problem? And they'll say, there is indeed. We call it moksha. That's where you reunite with Brahman and you escape from this wheel of samsara. Now, how you do that, we can talk about that for quite a while, but that's the point. That's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to reunite with ultimate reality. So, what is the meaning of life? First, you find out what the big problem is. Then you find out how to fix that problem. And that'll tell you what the meaning of life is for almost any point of view, almost any philosophy or culture. Now, we've kind of already seen this with Hinduism, and we're not going to be looking at the meaning of life from a Hindu perspective. But just to kind of practice this, what's the problem, what's the solution, let's look at just a few more. The Buddhists would have a slightly different take, even though they have many similarities with Hinduism. They would say the biggest problem is not separation. Rather, they would say it is suffering. Life hurts a lot. So is there anything we can do about it? And they would say, yes, there is a solution. We like to call it nirvana. If you're able to achieve nirvana, you forever overcome the problem of suffering. Along with that, this illusion of everything being separate. But that's the solution. That's the meaning of life from a classic Buddhist take. Now, again, we're not going to look at the meaning of life from Buddhism, but just a couple more. What would Judaism say? Judaism would be a little bit different. They're not as broadly focused on the whole world. They'd be a bit more focused on specifically Jews, and Jews as they would see them as belonging to the specific nation of Israel. They would say, once upon a time, things were really good for us. Why? Because God had a contract. Their word was a covenant. Same basic idea as a contract with Israel, with the nation of the Jews. He said that as long as we followed his laws, obeyed his commands, the ones that Moses brought back from God himself, that he would have a special place for us. We would have special blessings. He would take care of us. We would be an example to the rest of the world how humanity ought to live. It was glorious. It was wonderful, but we did not live up to our end of that covenant. We repeatedly broke the contract. And finally, at some point, God says, all right, if you're not going to keep your end, then I am not going to keep mine either. I am forsaking you as a special privileged people. You're going to be just like everyone else. And they would say that God's glory departed from Israel, at least in the terms of it being a special place that he was somehow blessing and prospering and using as an example for all the rest of the world. So is that the end of the story? Is Israel just going to become, a run-of-the-mill, just like everyone else, nothing special? No, the thought is that one day that there will be a restoration of Israel, and it will once again take its place of prominence before everyone else, and God will again use them as an example for how the rest of the world ought to live and behave. This will all be brought about through a Messiah who comes and restores Israel, causes Israel to keep their covenant, and somehow or some way is able to move or to I don't know if the right word is convince. I'm not sure what the right word is, but please the Lord, to please God, such that God is able to take them back and reinstate them in that position. Again, if you were to say, okay, that's interesting from a specifically Jewish perspective, what would be the Jewish perspective on life for everyone, Jews and Gentiles, the whole world? And they might say something like, well, the whole purpose of life is for mankind to live with justice, to be merciful to one another, and to walk humbly with God. Something like that probably would be what they would say is the point for everyone. But again, we're not going to look from a specifically Jewish perspective, nor are we going to look from a Christian perspective. However, just the same, are you able to guess, I've done this for you several times, are you able to guess what the problem would be according to most classic Christian doctrines or teachings? What is the big problem in the world today? And if you've been to Sunday school, if you've been to church, you might have heard someone preaching about sin. And in some ways, this is a little bit like Judaism. Again, it's a violation of God's law. It also, in some ways, comparable to Hinduism, although they're quite different. It causes a separation. We're no longer able to have the same close fellowship we could have had with God before because the sin separates us from God. Now, Christianity also has a Messiah like Judaism. However, unlike what contemporary Judaism teaches, Christianity teaches that the Messiah has actually already come, namely in Jesus of Nazareth, and he has enabled us to have salvation. What does that mean? To be reconciled to God through the life and work of Jesus. So the meaning and purpose of life, according to quite a few Christians, would be to vanquish, to overcome the problem of sin and separation of God through salvation provided by Jesus of Nazareth. But just like all the others, we're not going to look at any particular religious point of view of what the meaning of life is. We're going to look at a different one, a popular one today, a common one, yet a point of view that very few people ask, well, what if this perspective were true? What would the meaning of life be? What point of view are we going to look at? We're going to look from the perspective, from the worldview of naturalism. What is naturalism? We've already seen it. We've discussed it a few times, but let me give one of my favorite definitions. This comes from one of the most well-known scientists of the previous generation, Carl Sagan. Maybe you've heard of him and his well-known television broadcast called Cosmos. When he talks about the cosmos, he's talking about the entire physical universe and everything in it. And Carl Sagan would say the cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. Beyond the physical universe, there is nothing. There is no supernatural reality. There is no distinct mind or soul apart from the human body. There is, according to naturalism, no supernatural being, no God, no angels, no spirits. Everything only belongs to the physical world. Beyond that, there is nothing. That's what we mean by naturalism. That's the point of view of Karl Marx. That's very close to the point of view of Thomas Hobbes, the naturalist. Pretty close to what Aristotle believed. He thought there had to be one supernatural reality, the unmoved mover, in order to explain the natural world. We're going to leave that out. We're going to be pure naturalists. And we're going to ask, if that's true, supposing that were the case, then what would the meaning and purpose of life be? Speaking of that, here we have a quote from a well-known naturalist, Richard Dawkins. You may have heard of him. He's not just a run-of-the-mill, typical naturalist. He is some will call a militant naturalist. Some might say he is almost an evangelical naturalist in the sense that he's trying to actively bring in more people to that philosophy, to that position. And he has something to say about naturalism. When he talks about the scientific worldview, that's naturalism. That's the belief that the physical world is all there is. So let's read what he says. He says, the scientific worldview is so much more exciting, more poetic, more filled with sheer wonder than anything in the poverty-stricken arsenals of the religious imagination. That's what he has to say. Not only is naturalism true, it's gloriously true. It's wonderfully true, and we should be so thankful that it is, because it's so much better than all these other supernatural rabble that compete with it. Well, just remember Richard Dawkins. Remember his excitement and his exuberance over the wonder of naturalism. We're going to come back and look at him as he describes it further later on. So remember what he said now, just in general, and we'll come back and we'll see him again a little bit later. So, again, just for this topic, we're going to assume naturalism. If that's the case, what is the meaning? What is the purpose of life? Well, there are different answers to that, even among the naturalists who all believe the same things. There is the academic perspective, and that's the one that Kierkegaard, the one who we should supposedly be reading more closely from here, that's the one that he started off with. He kind of assumed this one was correct, but he didn't stay with it. He lost it. He left it behind because, well, frankly, it depressed him. It depressed him quite gravely. Then he moved on to something called the hedonistic perspective. Hedonism. Do some of you know what that means? Hedonism or hedonistic? It's got a very specific term, but we don't use it a lot. Some of you might know. I'm not going to mention it just yet. Maybe at the end of this video, I'll hint at it before we close. Later on, we'll go to the conformative perspective. And by the way, like I said, this is the one that Kierkegaard started with. He then moved on to the hedonistic perspective, tried that one, got burned out, got disenchanted with it, moved on to the conformative perspective, thought maybe it was time to grow up, do the mature thing. And conformative really isn't a word, I confess. I've kind of made it up. I've been a good philosopher and made up my own word. But of course, it has to do with conforming. Well, conforming to what? Well, we'll see. But eventually, Kierkegaard abandoned this one too, was actually quite disgusted with it, and ended his very short life. Did he live at 42, 47? That's about as long as he lived. I can't remember which it was. He didn't live real long. But he died saying, I found it. What he called the authentic perspective. He said, this really is what life is all about. And he didn't live it real long, but he lived it long enough, and he said, I found it, and if others search for it, they can find it too. Now, unlike some previous classes, I'm not going to try to go through these and cross off the first three as being problematic and having issues that are unable to be resolved. Therefore, we all need to accept the authentic perspective. I'm not going to try to hurt anyone to any one of these. I'm not going to try to rule any of these out. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to present the positive and negatives of both sides as clearly and accurately as I can. And I'll just leave it up to you. This is like a buffet. You don't have to choose. If there's something in one or the other that you like, go ahead and take it, incorporate it. Feel free to mix them as much as you like. If there are some things that you don't like that are not appealing to you, feel free to leave it behind. We're just going to give them a once-over examination. And we're going to kind of go in this order. We're going to spend most of our time on this one, maybe just break into the second one, but we'll come back in a later video and continue on with some of the rest. So when we talk about the academic perspective, the one that Kierkegaard began with, there's actually two different types. One is the old, the ancient, what the academics from the world of, say, Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and Aquinas and Augustine and all these other people whose name begins with an A, all these folks, they had a specific idea of what the meaning and purpose of life is. The way they did it, they didn't say, what's the problem, what's the solution? They looked at it a little bit differently. They said, okay, we're talking about the meaning of human life. So what separates humans from everything else on this planet? What makes humans unique? What makes us so special? And their answer was, it's the ability of humans to reason. Reason, which allows everything from being able to communicate linguistically. It allows us to solve math problems. It allows us to build things as simple as fire, as elaborate as a supercomputer, to a space station. Reason is something that humans are able to do that leaves the rest of the world behind. So since this is what makes us unique, this is our paramount ability, this is what we do so well, the ancients said that must be the meaning and purpose of life. The whole purpose of human life is to what? It's to think and to live rationally. Do what you are. Do what you are able to do better than anything else. For if you don't, if you neglect your reason, if you live by your animal instincts, then your life will have been wasted. You might as well have had the same life lived by a goat or a pig. Don't waste your life. Use that potential reason. So just think for a moment. Suppose, just for a second, that they got it right. We're going to move on to the new academic perspective in just a second, which is different, which is the one we're going to spend more time on. But suppose these guys all got it right. It's all about thinking and living rationally. So suppose that sometime in the future, you're talking to a friend, you're talking to a family member, you mentioned you took a philosophy class. Philosophy? What did you guys talk about in that class? And, we talked about whether humans have souls. We talked about whether people have free will. We talked about the existence of God, all the typical things. We also talked about the meaning of life. And I don't know, maybe they'll be serious, maybe they'll be a little teasing. But suppose this person you're talking to says, the meaning of life. Oh, master, teach me your ways and tell me what is the meaning of life. And this will be so easy for you to answer. All you need to do is perfectly strike this pose. Make sure your chin is firmly on the forepart of your hand. Make sure that you're hunched forward, rounded shoulders, as if you're oblivious to the world because you're deep in rational thought. I will let you keep your clothes on. Other than that, you need to strike this pose of the thinker and say, this, my good friend, is the whole purpose of life. How do you think they'll respond? Do you think they'll accept that? Of course, here, move over. Let me sit down and think deep thoughts too. Probably not. And I would suspect that you probably would be disenchanted with this as well. I mean, reason and thoughtfulness and all that stuff, that's good and it has its place, sure. But the whole purpose of life, this is all there is, nothing more to it? And Kierkegaard would have rebelled against this. Remember, life is not just a problem to be solved. It's not a solution to an equation. It's an experience to be lived. What about the living part of life? Well, this was nevertheless what many of the ancients thought life was all about, but it's been changed since then. Very few academics think this today. Now we have what is called the new academic perspective. It's replaced the old one. And I'm sure you can remember the term new academic perspective because you can abbreviate it, something that I'm sure some of you closely associate with philosophy. That's a NAP, N-A-P, new academic perspective. This one's a little bit more like the ones we've seen before. What's the problem? What's the solution? Well, when it comes to the problem, let's start off by asking, okay, how did everything start? Where did everything come from? Now, remember, we're all naturalists today. We're playing along with naturalism. So where did everything come from? Something that we might imagine looked, I don't know, something like this. What's that supposed to be? This is supposed to illustrate the Big Bang, the cause of the physical universe, the origin of the cosmos and everything therein, the reason for everything. Now, please, we're not talking about Aquinas anymore. Don't ask me where it came from or what exploded. We're not worried about that. All we know is the naturalist says it almost certainly happened, and that's why everything is the way it is today, the Big Bang. All right, fine. Now, the main thing that we're taking from this is that the Big Bang was not intentional. No one planned the explosion. No one intended it to grow one way or become something else. The Big Bang was not thinking, I'll be a man someday. It wasn't thinking anything. There was no plan, no purpose, no design, no goal. It just happened. It was a cosmic accident. So much for the origins, so much from where we come. Now let's skip to the end. What is our destination? Where are we all going? And not to be overly depressing, but you all know this. The way of all the living is to end life. The grave awaits everyone. Man, woman, old, child. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I can't check them, but I understand the mortality rate is rapidly approaching 100%. This is where everyone ends up. Okay, so what exactly is the problem according to the naturalist? Here's the problem. They're going to say, okay, you're telling me I come from a cosmic accident, no plan, no purpose, no design, just kind of, there it is. Yep, that's right. And you're telling me that after I spend some time walking this earth, no matter what I do or how I live or what happens in the meantime, eventually I will slip into this grave and cease to exist, headed for eternal oblivion. That's right. That's naturalism. And since we're talking about naturalism, there's no afterlife, there's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no reincarnation, there's no experience. It's gone. I'm gone. Everything ends from my perspective. Is that right? Yes, that's naturalism. Okay, here's my question then. If I come from nothing, and if I end in oblivion, how does it really matter how I live in between? My life is a dash between the day of my birth and the day of my death. And if the end is foreordained, if it all ends in this tragic non-existence, then how can what I do in the meantime matters? I mean, for something to actually make a difference, there's got to be something different when all is said and done. But I can't make anything different. This is inescapable. So what does it matter what I do in the meantime? It makes no difference. Everything always ends the same. Whether I'm a saint, like Mother Teresa, and I give my life to alleviating the pain of the poor and the suffering, or whether I am a demon, like Jack the Ripper, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, and I leave my mark of pain and agony behind my footsteps, we all go to the same place. We all end up the same way. So what difference does it matter how we get there? Where do you get a meaningful purpose of life from this? That seems to be the challenge. Does naturalism have a solution? Some say they do. They say, yes, you're right. We come without plan, without purpose. We all tragically fade out into empty oblivion. But while we're here, as the dash is being streaked across the tombstone of our existence, some of us will do great and memorable things. And some of those things will literally change the course of nations. You can literally shake the world. And the effects of your life and your actions and your accomplishments can long outlive your mortal flesh. So, as a quick example, there's Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton's been dead for an awfully long time, guys. And you know what? He's just getting started. He's still dead. He's going to be dead for a whole lot longer. But while he lived, just from his curiosity, his predisposition towards scientific thought and reason, he was able to change life. We are still benefiting greatly from his earth-shattering ideas. We have a modern world that has achieved, among other things, space travel because of the life and the work of Isaac Newton. There have been others. There have been Einsteins. There have been many other geniuses, many other people. Maybe it hasn't been through science. Maybe it's been through something else, but they have literally shaped the world. They have made the world a better place. Their fingerprints continue with us long after they're gone. So what is the meaning of life while it comes from meaninglessness and it ends in meaninglessness? Nevertheless, while we're here, we can leave our stamp of meaning upon the earth, and it can endure beyond us, like Newton and like so many others. Is that the solution? Well, it is a thought, it is a solution, but the naturalist may well come back and say, hey, I like it, I agree with it, I encourage it, I want this to be the case. But folks, how many of us are going to shake the planets? How many of us are future Isaac Newtons, Albert Einsteins, etc.? How many of us are going to accomplish anything of great significance that will literally change the course of human history? And the answer is very likely none of us. No one in this class. Not me. Probably not you. Probably not anyone you know. I'm not trying to be unkind, but that's just the way it is. Very few people change the course of history. And I'll prove it to you. The vast likelihood is that we're all going to die and just be forgotten within just a few generations. Here's how I can show you this. Just, as it were, raise your hand or mentally raise your hand. How many of you can name at least one of your grandparents by their first name? Can any of you do that? And I imagine that virtually everyone can. Everyone who hears me. So, oh yeah, Grandpa George, Grandma Rose. Yeah, I know their name. Not looking it up, just know it. Okay, good. My hand's up too. I know my grandparents' first name. Okay, so again, just from your memory, how many of you can go back one generation earlier? How many of you can know the name of any one of your grandparents' parents? So if you have, biologically speaking, 4 grandparents, then you would double that. You would have 8 great-grandparents. You have more of them. How many of those can you remember without checking at least one first name? And I imagine there's still at least half, probably more than half of your hands mentally are still raised. Oh yeah, I've got one and I do too. But I can only remember one. Of all 8 great-grandparents, I can only remember one. What if we go back a 3rd generation beyond that? Great-great-grandparents. All of a sudden, that's 16 biological great-great-grandparents. How many of you can name just any one of them? My hand's going down. I don't even know their names. Not one of them, not one of the 16. And I imagine a bunch of your hands went down too. Not all of them. Some of you still know, but most of you don't. One more. This will be the last one. How many of you can go back 4? How many of you know the first name of at least one of your great-great-great-great-grandparents? Any one of 32 people who contributed to your life, your existence today. Can you name one? And I suspect most of you are out. I have had 1. I have occasionally had 2. I've never had any more than that in my class who could just name one of their great-great-great-grandparents. And guys, we would not even be alive if it weren't for them. I don't even know their names. And to be frightfully honest, I don't really care. It doesn't much matter to me. I've asked those who could tell me a name, and I said, can you tell me anything about them? Can you tell me what they did for a living? Can you tell me where they grew up? Can you tell me? And very few of them could tell me anything about them. All they knew was the name because it had been traced back and they just happened to remember it. Guys, that's going to be the vast, vast majority of us. Within several generations, we will be forgotten. Our own descendants won't know who we were, and neither will they much care. And why should they? What difference does it make? Okay, but even so, I'm probably not going to invent anything spectacular. I'm not going to change the world in all likelihood. But can't I contribute? Even if I can't complete an earth-shattering task, can't I contribute to something important, something meaningful, something that can go on? What can I contribute to? Well, here's an easy one. I know not everyone can do this. I know not everyone will do this. But this is just one example. I can contribute my little bit to the continuance of the human race. I, and almost everyone, can at least have children. and why I am destined to the grave, and why all of my children and every individual is destined to die and pass out of existence, nevertheless, we can keep the species going. Humanity will continue. Human accomplishments will continue. And as small a role as it is, we can all stand up and say, I contributed to that. I did my part to keep it going, and it's going to make a difference as long as it continues. And the naturalist is going to say, may it be even as you say. But I still don't think that we're properly grasping the seriousness of the situation. For even for those few of us who will be able to contribute great things, and let's go ahead and group in everyone else who can at least keep the species going and contributes in some small way to what will happen in the distant future. That's all wonderful. But there's something that naturalism tells us that we're not considering. We've already seen the eventual end of every single individual. We know that that's the grave. This would also seem to be the case not only for each individual, but actually for the entirety of the human species as well. But why would that be? Why would the whole species have to die out? I mean, we know it could, but why believe that it would? We've got such a good head start. Well, right now it has to do with the sun in our solar system. Right now it's what astronomers call a yellow dwarf. However, if it follows the path of all star evolution that we've been able to observe thus far, it will eventually grow from a yellow dwarf into what they call a red giant, massively increasing its size. How much will it increase its size? It will increase. It will grow so large, inflate so much, that the orbit of the Earth will be within the sun. It will consume the planet. Now, this isn't going to happen anytime real soon. I guarantee you're all going to get to summer before this happens. This is quite a ways down the line, but nevertheless, the Earth has a time limit. The planet itself only has so far to go. And of course, we won't be here once the Earth gets swallowed by its sun. For long before that, somewhat like the planet of Mercury, everything on this planet will be dead or dying. It will not be able to take the heat. And if some small bacteria or particularly heat-resilient single-celled organisms are able to continue in it, they won't be able to continue inside the sun. Or at least, even if they did, and I don't think they will, it won't be us. So if the Earth itself has a day of its impending doom, certainly all of humanity does as well. So once again, the naturalist asks, if this is the unavoidable conclusion, if this is the way it all ends, if there's no way we can change it, no way we can make a difference, everything we do, it'll be as if it never happened. It'll be forgotten, lost to history. What difference does it make? Is there any solution to this problem? Now here, we can't be quite as certain. Here, we're not quite so sure. But there's at least a possibility. What is that possibility? I may be speculating here. I may be overly optimistic, but guys, I'm willing to grasp at a few straws. We're already able to perform some very short, very basic space travel. We can already get to the moon. We're working on getting to asteroids and other of our closest neighbors within the solar system. Given that this event of the Earth being swallowed whole by the sun, given that that is so far away in the future, there is at least a possibility that by that time, we will develop the ability to actually physically leave not only the planet, but the entire solar system before the sun decomposes and collapses into a black hole. Now, can we guarantee this? No, of course we can't. But we can at least hope it's possible. It could happen. Maybe if we work hard enough, everything we do can in some way continue. So here's the basic idea. This is not the Milky Way galaxy, but let's just pretend that it is. Suppose that our sun within a solar system within the many solar systems of the Milky Way galaxy begins to decompose. Are there any others within the galaxy that we can use? Maybe, maybe not. We haven't noticed any so far. That's fine. Maybe by that time we can go to a different one, a younger one. We can start again, do things better this time. Escape the tragic death of our galaxy. Well, that's all good and fine, but at some point, won't the same thing happen to this galaxy and to this solar system as well? Yes, it will, but we'll just do what we did again. We'll be on the lookout the whole time for another place, and we'll move on to another one. And then we'll move on to another, and we'll just keep going. Well, I hope so, says the naturalist. He says, I'm holding out hope. It sounds great to me. It would be wonderful. All this hopping from one galaxy, from one solar system to another, like a frog, hopping from one lily pad to another. I'm all for that. But even so, all this buys us is time, and there's going to come a point where all of that time runs out, not just for our solar system, not just for the Milky Way galaxy, not just for whatever galaxy we come to, but in fact for the entire physical universe, for all the galaxies. Why? As large and as vast as it is, the entire physical universe is still governed by the basic laws of physics, the fundamental laws of nature, among which is the second law of thermodynamics. We've talked about it before. I don't need to go on at length, but remember, that's the law that says energy is always going from being concentrated in one powerful spot to kind of dispersing and diffusing like a cloud out and spreading out into being less and less concentrated until it's hardly noticeable. The easiest way to picture this is the energy of heat. So again, think of a common everyday illustration. Think of a piping, steaming, hot cup of coffee sitting in a room. There is a lot of energy concentrated into that beverage to keep it hot. The molecules, if you could zoom in real close and see them, they're moving around. They're moving pretty quick. But over time, the energy in there begins to leave the coffee. The heat begins to kind of seep out and just kind of equally go in every direction in the room. And if you give it long enough, that what was piping hot beverage will eventually become no warmer than the room around it. That's entropy. That's the second law of thermodynamics. Heat and all of energy is going from being more useful, more concentrated, to being less concentrated, more dispersed, and less useful. And what's true about that cup of coffee is also true about the sun. And what's true about the sun is going to be true about the galaxy. It's going to be true about every galaxy. It's going to be true about every star. Sooner or later, just as every cup of coffee is going to cool off, every sun is going to cool off, decompose. The gravity that holds the planets together will either dissipate and lose them out into the frigid space, or else they will get sucked into the collapsed stars that form black holes. And then, as Stephen Hawking showed us, over time, even black holes radiate out content. Even they will eventually die. And the long-term state of the universe is what the physicists call the heat death of the universe. And this is counterintuitive. Heat death, doesn't that sound like a fiery end? But it's not. It's actually the opposite. It's frigid. It would be an icy end if there were any water left to freeze. But basically what happens is over eons, great amounts of time, every star, every solar system, every source of light and energy will slowly fade. The light will disappear. The energy will seep away. and the universe will continue to expand until it has basically become nothing but an extremely thin and sparse cloud of hydrogen. And I'm sorry, no matter what you may have seen in Star Trek, you cannot have intelligent hydrogen. And this seems to be inevitable. Why? Because of the second law of thermodynamics. And guys, if we don't understand the second law of thermodynamics, then we don't understand physics. And if we don't understand physics, we might as well give up naturalism because we don't understand it at all. It might as well be magic to us. So, if this is the end, not just of the planet, but of everything, then the haunting question of the naturalist returns. Since nothing could possibly be any different at the end, no matter how we act or refuse to act, what difference does it make how we behave now? I said it before, I'll say it again. For something to actually make a difference, it has to be different. But if we cannot cause anything to be different, then how can we say anything that we do actually makes a difference? So let us lay it on the line. What does the new academic perspective say about the meaning of life? It says, all right, so let me get this straight. You're saying I come from a cosmic accident without plan, without purpose, without intention, just splat, here I am. And naturalism says, yes. And you're telling me that I am destined to die and pass out of existence. There is no exception. No one survives continually. And naturalism says, yes. And further, you're telling me that the whole universe is destined to die from this cosmic heat death. Basically, not die in an organic sense, obviously, since it's not living, but essentially become cold, lifeless, uninhabitable, no place even to stand and nothing to stand there. And naturalism says, yes. So you're telling me that nothing I do will last? Nothing I do will make any change? Nothing I do will have any significance that endures? Yes. What naturalism is saying, rather coldly, is that there is no meaning. There is no purpose to life. Now, let me say, you might have your own meaning. You might have your own purpose. Maybe your meaning of life is to make as much money as you can. Maybe your meaning in life is to try to make the world a better place while it lasts. And that's okay. You can have your own pretend meaning, but it's not real. It's just make-believe. Whatever meaning you make up for yourself is no more actual or real than any other meaning anyone else makes up. For example, if I made my own meaning in life to count every single blade of grass on the Palo Alto campus, as trivial and ridiculous as that sounds, I guess I could make that my own meaning. But if someone said, does it really matter? Is he actually making a difference? Is he accomplishing anything? The answer is no. And ultimately, you're not going to accomplish anything more than what I do. So we can pretend that we have meanings. We can make up ones and say that's our purpose. But remember, ultimately, since it makes no difference in the end, it's all make-believe. And by the way, you don't have to take my word for it. Quite a few naturalists are saying this. They're admitting it. Remember Richard Dawkins, the guy who talked about naturalism being so wonderful, so poetic, boggling the imagination. He goes on to say exactly what it entails. He says, there is at bottom no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Thus spoke the naturalist. I want to share just briefly a quote from someone named Lord Byron, a writer from an age gone by. He was actually quite a dangerous fellow to know, a dangerous fellow to be known by. But he wrote that knowledge is sorrow. They who know the most must mourn the deepest or the fatal truth. Why did he say that? I'm not exactly sure. I do not profess to understand the twisted mind of this individual. But I'll tell you what it says to me. Back in the 1800s, when science was really starting to make leaps and bounds, we literally believed, or many people literally believed, that science, technology, and learning would be our salvation. It almost became, in some people's minds, certainly not everyone's, a substitute religion. Why? Excuse me. Because for many eons, people believed that some sort of religious entity would come and would eradicate all evil and suffering on the planet and give everyone a perfect, ideal, heavenly existence. Well, science may not come and do that suddenly, but science promised to do it after a long progression of learning. Diseases were being wiped out. Polio has more or less disappeared. Malaria, which still ravages some areas of the earth, we have a treatment for it. We could stop it everywhere if we really wanted to. Starvation. The United States, all by itself, through modern farming methods, produces enough food every single year to feed the planet, the whole planet, leaving no one behind. It's done a lot. Science has done a pretty good job of paying the rent so far. However, those who have looked the deepest into science and the furthest into the future have peered towards the end that we've seen. And they've said, as much as it promises us, science also tells us that the end is inevitable, unavoidable. It will not stop for anyone, and it will take us all with it. That which we cling to, we were going to build our own heaven, either here on earth or amongst the stars of the sky. It turned out that it was going to all end tragically. But we did not know that until we peered even more distantly into the future. Those who know the most mourn the deepest or the fatal truth. So is there anything that can be said about this? Well, maybe there is. Maybe even despite all of this pessimism, this macabre worldview, this hopeless outlook, maybe there's still a ray of hope. Now, this is not to object to or deny anything that's said, but in the face of the teeth of this hopelessness, some naturalists have said we can still rescue a truly meaningful existence from the jaws of despair. Enter hedonism. What is hedonism? It is the worldview, it is the philosophy that says, I'll tell you what the purpose and meaning of life is. It is to enjoy as much pleasure as possible. Hedon, the Greek word for pleasure. We're going to die, but we're here. Enjoy it while you can. You've heard the song, I'm not here for a long time, I'm here for a good time. Well, what else is there to do exactly? What are the alternatives other than to say, we're here today, we may be gone tomorrow, let us eat, let us drink, let us be merry, so that when we do inevitably pass into oblivion, we can say, I enjoyed every minute, or at least as much of it as I possibly can. What do you think of this, which out of the despair of the academic perspective, Soren Kierkegaard eventually marched into the hedonistic perspective and said, forget learning, forget science, forget the intellectual pursuits. I've got something more fulfilling. I'm going to have fun. I'm actually going to enjoy this little flicker of life I have while I still have it. Was he just right? Is this the best we can do? Is this the meaning and purpose of life? It tends to be quite popular with students. Well, we'll come back and we'll take a closer look at it, and we'll also look at the other stages when we come back next time.